Massachusetts needs more clean energy infrastructure, but the current permitting process can take several years and can vary significantly across the state's 351 cities and towns. The Department of Energy Resources is drafting new rules that will make the municipal permitting process faster and more consistent, and the department wants to hear from you. I'm Rick Collins, the Director of the Clean Energy Siting and Permitting Division within the Department of Energy Resources, or DOER. With me today is Connor Rockett, the Southeast Regional Coordinator for the division. Over the past several months, Connor and the team has spoken with town officials, municipal and regional planners, interested citizens, environmental groups, and clean energy infrastructure developers to get ideas on how we can make this a better process for all. On Friday, September 26, we officially published our draft regulations and kicked off the public comment period. Between October 6th and 9th, we will host a series of public information sessions to hear more from you about what we have proposed, what we got right, what we got wrong, and what we need to clarify. Finally, on October 15th, we will hold the official public hearing on the proposed regulations before the public comment period closes on October 17th. We will get more into the details for those events a little bit later on. The point of this video is to provide you with important background about the draft regulations. Clean energy policy is complicated, and so is talking about municipal permitting and zoning regulations. Our goal is to help you feel more informed about the draft regulations, why we're making these changes in the first place, and how you can make your voice heard during this process.
So why are we talking about clean energy infrastructure siting and permitting? And what is clean energy infrastructure? When we talk about clean energy infrastructure, we are talking about all of the structures and technology needed to generate and provide affordable, emissions-free power to Massachusetts residents and businesses. This includes new solar and wind generation, energy storage systems, and the transmission and distribution lines that carry that power throughout the electric grid. Massachusetts is working hard to bring new energy into the state to meet rising demand and to accelerate the development of low-cost electricity generation. To diversify our energy supply, lower costs for residents and businesses, and meet our growing electricity demand, we need to increase the amount of clean energy infrastructure in the Commonwealth. However, the state heard your feedback that there were obstacles preventing more investment in this infrastructure. One of the biggest obstacles is the Commonwealth's municipal permitting process. Under the current system, clean energy projects typically need approval from a half-dozen different departments and boards, such as the Building Department, Planning Board, and/or Conservation Commission. And if someone disagrees with a decision from one of those boards and departments, there are multiple avenues for appeals. The state also heard concerns from elected leaders and citizens that clean energy projects too often were being proposed for environmentally sensitive areas or involved cutting down acres of forest. In 2023, Governor Maura Healey created a special commission to provide recommendations to reform clean energy siting and permitting. The commission included representatives from municipalities, environmental justice organizations, advocacy groups, electric utilities, agriculture, energy siting, the clean energy industry, labor, housing, and real estate. In 2024, the legislature passed a law based on the commission's findings. The law calls for an expedited permitting process for clean energy infrastructure projects. It separates projects into large and small projects, with permitting for large projects handled by the Energy Facilities Siting Board and small projects handled by local communities. Small projects include generation projects under 25 megawatts, storage projects under 100 megawatt hours, and transmission and distribution projects in new right-of-ways under 1 mile. As a side note, the new law does not apply to rooftop solar projects. The biggest change is that the law placed a cap on how long it takes to review projects. Municipalities now have 12 months to issue all decisions needed for these projects. Projects also will use a universal application across every community. And instead of each department or board decision being appealable, only the final permit will be appealable. That brings us to DOER's role. The law directed DOER to create regulations that make these changes possible. We will also establish, for the first time, baseline public health, safety, and environmental standards for clean energy projects. Additionally, DOER will create a universal application as well as a standard set of conditions in case a community can't finish their work in 12 months and the project receives what's known as constructive approval. DOER is also enacting a new site suitability scoring process that is designed to encourage projects to be sited on pre-developed land or land that has low environmental impacts. Finally, we are drafting language to help communities determine appropriate mitigation packages for projects that do have environmental impacts. Back to you, Rick.
Thank you, Connor. Let me pause here because that's already a lot, and this is a very complex process with a lot of moving pieces. But let's take a quick second to understand how this rulemaking process works. To turn the climate law into action, we are promulgating these regulations. Regulations essentially are rules developed by executive agencies like DOER with the permission of the legislature that have the force of law. Part of the required promulgation process includes releasing draft regulations, which we have just done, and then seeking feedback from stakeholders. To go along with the regulations, we are developing what are also known as guidelines. Guidelines are a set of clarifications, interpretations, procedures, forms, and applications developed by a state agency to assist parties in complying with the regulations. The guidelines available on the division website are preliminary. We will have a formal public feedback period for the guidelines later this fall. DOER is also preparing new model bylaws for solar and storage projects. These model bylaws are optional and don't have to be adopted by municipalities, but they do create a framework that is aligned with state policy. We will also be having a public information session on those later on this fall. This law, the draft regulations, and preliminary guidelines are all available on DOER's website, which is on the screen below. In this webinar, we will do our best to help explain what will be established by state law, by regulations, and by guidelines. We're now going to walk through many of these proposed changes. We don't have time to touch on everything, but we'll focus on the bigger issues, as well as those that require a little extra explanation. We've heard about the need for project applicants to do more outreach work at the start of the process. So the new law creates a pre-filing period which features a number of new steps project proponents will have to complete before they submit an application. About 60 days before an application is filed, project proponents will need to file a notice of intent to file an application. This notice will include basic project information such as what type of project it is, the proposed location, the size, and a public outreach plan. The steps contained within the public outreach plan will vary depending on the size and scope of the project. But at the base minimum, applicants will need to have a website or a web page where people can find information about the project. It'll need to provide information on how people ask questions and submit comments. And the applicant will need to demonstrate the steps they took to make people aware of the project. The applicant will also need to hold a pre-filing meeting with local officials to ensure the details are accurate, that they're aware of any environmental, cultural, or historical resources on the property, that all the local permits they will need, discuss the list of stakeholders who will need to be made aware of the project, and generally make sure that everyone is aligned on all the needs and the next steps. The applicant also must hold at least one public meeting to provide an overview of project details and receive comments from the public. We mentioned that DOER is preparing a series of guidelines. In addition to these regulations, one set of guidelines will outline the public outreach expected during the pre-filing period. If local officials feel the applicant hasn't met the requirements, they can direct the applicant to do additional outreach. Connor?
As mentioned earlier, one of our regulatory goals is to make the clean energy permitting process more consistent. Currently, clean energy infrastructure developers need to navigate 351 different application procedures. The climate law wants to reduce that to one. The Commonwealth already has a similar process for projects that need Conservation Commission approval. The Department of Environmental Protection currently prepares and hosts all Wetlands Protection Act permit applications. The applicant fills out the forms from the DEP website and they are sent to the local Conservation Commission. DOER is in the process of developing this new universal clean energy infrastructure application. When completed, the application will contain all information needed for applicable local decisions and permits. To help make this process easier, DOER will develop an online permitting portal for applicants to use. The application will be filed online through this portal, and copies will automatically be sent to the host community, as well as be made available for public review. It's going to take some time to get the system online, so initially the application will be a digital form. One of the key reforms under the climate law is the 12-month review timeline. However, that means that applications can't be submitted with information missing. The application needs to be fully complete and ready for review by every department and board on day one. To make that happen, a designated official from the municipality will review the application for completeness. If it isn't complete, the applicant will have 30 days to resubmit a complete application. We believe this new application process will result in less paperwork for applicants and also make it easier for municipalities to immediately start their review work, knowing they have a complete application in their hands. The application is another piece that will be released as a guideline. That way we can update it quickly as needed. Rick?
So we're going to switch over to public health, safety, and environmental standards. Clean energy infrastructure projects are complex, and the technology is constantly evolving. Municipalities have asked for guidance on the baseline public health, safety, and environmental standards, and project applicants have asked for consistency across the Commonwealth. We are drafting these standards through the guideline process, so we will have the flexibility to update them as the technology and regulatory needs change. The guidelines will touch upon a number of areas, including areas of critical environmental concern, building on Article 97 lands, hazardous waste protections, lighting, structural setbacks, electrical codes, grading, stormwater runoff, herbicide applications, and emergency response plans. There's several pages worth of these standards that we'll have to go through. We understand there is particular interest in how these standards will apply to battery storage projects. We are proposing strict electrical code standards, the latest national and state fire safety standards, setback distances that protect abutting structures and trees, and perhaps most importantly, giving municipalities the ability to restrict siting facilities within Zone 2 wellhead protection areas. As I mentioned earlier, these guidelines are available on DOER's website, and we look forward to receiving your thoughts on them. To be clear, we are creating an expedited municipal permitting process for clean energy projects, something that generally doesn't apply to other projects. All decisions, including the Planning Board, Conservation Commission, Zoning Board, Historical Commission, if they need to get involved, need to be finalized within 12 months. These regulations don't change the way boards and departments conduct their reviews. Each agency can still conduct a full review, still hold public hearings when required. The regulations don't say what those decisions have to be. They could be an approval with conditions, or even a denial. But decisions have to be made within that 12-month time frame. All individual department and board decisions will be compiled into a final decision issued by a designated local official. If a final decision isn't issued within 12 months, the application then receives constructive approval. If a board or department issues a denial, all the other boards and departments still need to finish their review work so that a final decision can be compiled. Municipalities asked about safeguards to prevent applicants from possibly misusing the process, dragging their feet in order to earn a constructive approval. The regulations include language requiring applicants to respond to questions from boards and departments or provide revised plans in an expedited time frame so that the process can't be held up. Likewise, municipalities will need to follow the process and not send last-minute questions or study requests to applicants. The regulations provide municipalities with the ability to tailor the process based on the uniqueness of their government structure. For example, cities and towns can determine which official oversees the pre-filing and application review processes and who monitors the 12-month review clock. It could be the town clerk, mayor, building commissioner, planning director. Those decisions are up to the municipalities. To help with this process, DOER has drafted a model permitting administrative bylaw that cities and towns can choose to modify and adopt. One other note, We recognize that disagreements may occur at certain points during this process. To help keep the process moving forward, DOER will create a circuit rider program to help work through disagreements. It's based on a model used by DEP that's proven to be helpful and we feel will prevent unneeded appeals and result in a smoother permitting process. Connor?
Another key change is the establishment of a site suitability scoring process by the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. This process is designed to encourage the development of clean energy infrastructure projects that avoid, mitigate, and minimize impacts on the environment and people to the greatest extent practicable. Project sites will be scored based on 5 specific criteria: climate change resilience, carbon storage and sequestration, biodiversity, agricultural resources, and social and environmental burdens. Factors such as development potential and social and environmental benefits will be used as score modifiers. Municipalities are recommended to consider a project's total site suitability score when determining permit conditions. Sites with a total site suitability score of 5 or below should be assumed to be highly suitable and require minimal to no mitigation. We will talk more about mitigation in a couple minutes. Conversely, significant deference should be given to municipalities if the project's total site suitability score is above 15. Applicants will need to estimate their scores as part of the pre-filing process and then request a formal score determination completed by a third party prior to filing the formal application. Certain smaller projects will be exempt from performing site suitability scores. These include clean energy infrastructure facilities with a site footprint under 1 acre, solar facilities less than 25 kilowatts, and facilities less than or equal to 250 kilowatts, provided they are behind the meter projects. DOER is also developing new model bylaws that will encourage municipalities to consult with the site suitability scoring models to establish clean energy overlay zoning districts that will allow projects by right. Back to you, Rick.
The regulations and guidelines tie clean energy infrastructure project mitigation to those site suitability scores. For example, a project sites that receive a score of 1 or less for any specific criteria will be considered highly suitable, so no mitigation or minimization projects will be required. On the flip side, a project site that receives a score greater than 4 for any specific criteria is considered unsuitable and requires extensive mitigation and/or minimization. The proposed rules say that minimization or mitigation projects need to have a rational nexus to the project and should be tailored to criteria-specific scores. For example, if a project site receives a score of 4 for carbon storage and sequestration, the applicant will need to provide a slate of mitigation projects such as a reforestation initiative, contributions to a tree planting fund a land conservation agreement or purchase, or other related offsets. The guidelines also contain a suggested payment formula. It's based on a similar mitigation formula established under the most recent SMART program regulations. It involves dividing the total site suitability score by 25, multiplying it by a fee per acre, and again by the number of impacted acres in the site footprint. While the regulations and guidelines will provide the framework for a mitigation package, the final decisions will ultimately be part of the permitting and review process conducted by the town. Connor?
DOER anticipates that 12 months will be enough time to review complete and accurate clean energy infrastructure project applications. But when that doesn't happen and an application receives a constructive approval, we are creating a set of common conditions to guide facility construction, operation, and decommissioning. These conditions touch on transfers of ownership, bond and fee payments, traffic management plans, work hours, staging plans, air and noise impacts, dust control, soil removal, stormwater runoff, and emergency response plans. These conditions, which are outlined in the preliminary guidelines, only apply to projects that receive constructive approval. However, municipalities should feel free to use them as a baseline and are able to add their own project-specific conditions within reason. Finally, the appeals process. This is primarily spelled out in the climate law. Interested parties will have 30 days after the issuance of the permit to petition the Energy Facility Siting Board for a de novo review. Under a de novo review, the entire permit is appealed, not just certain board or department decisions. The board then has to issue a final decision within 6 months. The board will base its decisions on whether the municipality has followed the climate law and the regulations and guidelines.
So that sums up the draft regulations. It's a lot of information, and I hope you found this helpful. A reminder that we will be discussing these regulations in the preliminary guidelines during a series of upcoming public information sessions. They are scheduled for Monday, October 6th at 6 p.m. at the Massachusetts Maritime Academy in Bourne. Tuesday, October 7th at 6 p.m. at the Essex South Shore Agricultural Technical School in Danvers. Wednesday, October 8th at 6 p.m. at Fitchburg State University. And Thursday, October 9th at 7 p.m. at UMass Amherst. All sessions will be hybrid via Zoom. In addition, we will hold our official public hearing on these regulations on Wednesday, October 15th at 7 p.m. This meeting will be virtual only. Information on how to register for the Zoom sessions or for any of the meetings is available on the DOER website. And as a reminder, all of the guidelines and model bylaws will also be subject to an additional public information session later this fall. If you have questions about anything that we've covered or thoughts about how we can make this better, please send us an email at doer.siting.permitting@mass.gov. Thank you to Abington Community Access and Media for producing this video, and thank you for taking the time to watch it. We hope to hear from you soon.